It's midday in Dakar, 1 o'clock in Praia. Good afternoon and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and worldwide on wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink, and here are the top stories. Nigeria's organized labor vows to reject mega addition to 60,000 naira as minimum wage.
Let's assume we agree on a national minimum wage of 400,000 naira today, that if the value is not preserved before we leave the table or the next day, this 400,000 naira may not be able to buy a loaf of bread.
Senegalese government welcomes result of the national dialogue on justice reforms and assures full implementation.
This national dialogue was more than a simple series of debates. It was a demonstration of our collective commitment to the ideal of justice, a reminder of our responsibility towards each citizen and each community, and an affirmation of our will to build a future where the rule of law is respected.
United Nations Humanitarian Coordination raises alarm over the increase in displacement of populations in Mali, and health authorities in Liberia moves to clamp down on fake and illegal institutions. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Imo Edit with Newslink.
Many thanks for staying with us, and a warm welcome to our listeners in the Gambia, Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Well, let's begin in Nigeria with the update on labor matters, as the organized labor has vowed to reject any lean addition to the 60,000 naira, about $40 offer by the tripartite committee on the new minimum wage. The president of the Trade Union Congress, TUC, Festus Osifo, disclosed this on Tuesday, hours after the organized labor, comprising of the TUC and the Nigeria Labour Congress NLC, suspended its industrial action, which started on Monday. Before the strike, the tripartite committee, which has the federal government, states, and the organized private sector as members, offered labor 48,000 naira, then 54,000 naira, and later 57,000 naira, and rounded off at 60,000 naira, which is $40. All four offers were rejected by the TUC and NLC. Meanwhile, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu today is expecting a template for a new minimum wage from the Minister of Finance. Tinubu had on Tuesday ordered his coordinating minister, Wadr, to present the template just a day after the nationwide strike by the organized labor crippled the economy. The government has a limited time to negotiate on agreeable wage with the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress before the end of the 7-day ultimatum. WD Usman Amar in Abuja reports.
President Tinubu's directive follows the suspension of a nationwide strike by organized labor on Tuesday. The strike, which began on Monday, was relaxed after the tripartite committee comprising the federal government, the Nigeria Labour Congress NLC, and the Trade Union Congress TUC agreed to consider a new minimum wage. Mohammed Idris is Nigeria's Minister of Information and National Orientation.
The President has directed the Minister of Finance to do the numbers and get back to him between today and tomorrow so that we can have some figures ready for negotiation with Labour. Let me say that Mr. President is determined to go with what the committee has said. He is also looking at the welfare of Nigerians. Like I've said earlier, government is not against, it's not an opponent of Labour discussions, it's not an opponent of wage increase. But what is there is the government is always desirous of ensuring that there is a balance between what government pronouncement is and what the realities are on ground.
Public affairs analysts in the country suggest that the template will be tabled for deliberations at the Federal Executive Council held every Wednesday and chaired by the President. An urgent decision is needed according to the two largest workers' unions, NLC and TUC, emphasizing that the strike was only relaxed and not suspended to allow parties to reach a consensus on the minimum wage in the next 7 days. Organized labor has been demanding a new minimum wage raise from 30,000 naira or $21 to 494,000 naira or $300 and had given the government a deadline of May 31 to agree on a new wage. The government then proposed 60,000 naira or $50, which was rejected by labor. The strike on June 3 affected businesses, airports, universities, hospitals and power supply across the country. The government's decision to consider a new minimum wage has averted further disruption to the economy. As a reminder, the Minimum Wage Act of 2019, signed by former President Muhammadu Buhari, requires a review after every 5 years to meet the contemporary economic demands of workers. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
Well, let's take a listen to Festus Osifo, who is the president of the Trade Union Congress, reacting to the government's proposal.
You see, when we go to negotiating table, you could see a lot of intellectual work that we put into these conversations. He was talking about the issue of value of the naira. That has been our cry. What we have said was that if the value of 30,000 naira in 2019 was the same thing that it is today, we would not be pushing for the level of minimum wage. Maybe we would have just done some marginal increases if the value was the same. We have done a lot of proposals. We've had a lot of debate on the table on what government could do to ensure that the value of naira is preserved. We even told them on the table that our fear is this. Let's assume we agree on a national minimum wage of 400,000 naira today, that if the value is not preserved, before we leave the table or the next day, this 400,000 naira may not be able to buy a loaf of bread. So our attention has actually been on the value, not volume. But the reason that we are pushing for volume today is because for you to get value today, the volume must be right. So government must do everything possible to work on the economy. We are ready. We have members cut across everywhere. We are ready to put our intellectual wherewithal into this to ensure that the economy works.
Festus Osifo is the president of the Trade Union Congress. And finally, Nigeria, a mining pit collapse in Galgoko village of Niger State in North Central region killed one person and left 30 others trapped. The state's emergency agency spokesperson Hussein Ibrahim said on Tuesday that 6 miners were rescued with serious injuries. The incident at the underground gold mine occurred on Monday after heavy rain softened the soil around the pit, triggering the collapse. Ibrahim noted that rescue efforts are underway with excavators brought in, but difficult conditions and insecurity in the area are hampering operations. Nigeria's Niger State is rich in minerals but plagued by insecurity. Large-scale mining operations face violence from armed groups, while safety standards are poorly enforced at a large number of unregulated small-scale mines.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Well, back in Senegal, the National Conference on Justice came to a close on Tuesday, with the Reform and Modernization Commissions submitting their recommendations. Several agreements were reached, including limiting the powers of the public prosecutor and digitizing judicial procedures. The various recommendations will be forwarded to the President on June 17. A Chatisa report.
At the end of the meeting, several recommendations were articulated by the different commissions that held these reflections on the Senegalese justice system. Key among the proposals by the Reform Commission are limiting the powers of the public prosecutor and replacing the Constitutional Council with the Constitutional Court. The Commission also recommended revising the various existing codes, including the Penal Code, the Code of Criminal Procedure, and the Family Code. The Modernization Commission, for its part, advocates the autonomy of the judiciary and measures to improve the conditions of prisoners in correctional facilities across the country. Senegal's Minister of Justice, Ousmane Diagne, says the government welcomes the various suggestions that emerged from the consultations.
Ce dialogue national a été bien plus qu'une simple série de débats.
This national dialogue was more than a simple series of debates. It was a demonstration of our collective commitment to the ideal of justice, a reminder of our responsibility towards each citizen and each community, and an affirmation of our will to build a future where the rule of law is respected and where justice is accessible to all without distinction. The recommendations of this dialogue must be implemented with rigor and determination.
En œuvre avec rigueur et détermination.
The hundreds of participants in this dialogue also recommended the digitization of the judicial system to put an end to delays in processing cases. No consensus was reached on whether or not the President of the Republic should remain on the High Council of the Judiciary.
Ajatiso filed that report. Meanwhile, the Senegalese National Council of the House of Breeders on Tuesday held a national forum to promote the institutional, legislative and regulatory innovations which will govern pastoral activities in the country. The forum, in collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization FAO, also allowed stakeholders to share and popularize the pastoral code. This code was first adopted at the National Council of Ministers held on December 28, 2022 and voted in the National Assembly by January 10, 2023. Ogibiarika has more details in this report.
Since its adoption last January, the Pastoral Code has finally been available to livestock breeders, according to Usman Mbai, Secretary General of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food Sovereignty and Livestock. This new text will regulate the sector.
The objective was to have a consensual code to take into account the concerns of the pastoral world. It is also the place for the Ministry of Agriculture to salute such initiatives that aim to strengthen professional organizations. These are organizations that have the lead of their members, but that must also ensure that all legal instruments that encompass agriculture can be appropriated by the actors who are in charge of implementation. Legal entities that are involved in the breeding process.
The Pastoral Code will also end recurring conflict between breeders and farmers in rural areas. It will also help improve animal health. Amadou Tijan Nyang, Country Team Leader, FAO Emergency Center for Transboundary Animal Disease Control.
I think the aim of the court was that how to have some law to have the different dialogue between agriculture and livestock farmers, how to have space for the rear of animals. And the unit I'm leading in Senegal, we are working in the health sector. And if you know, health sector in production is very important because we have to have food safety for people to have very secure food, but also for the production you have to have healthy animals.
The Pastoral Code, welcomed by all livestock breeders' organizations, is considered a major innovation in the optimal management of the economic potential of the livestock sector in national strategies for emergence and food sovereignty.
Ogibiarika found that report in Mali. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, is sounding the alarm about the situation of displaced populations. In its latest report published at the beginning of June, the UN agency takes stock of the situation in May and April. According to the UN agency, millions of people, mostly children, require urgent humanitarian assistance. The situation could deteriorate further between now and August, according to the report. David Vincent has more details.
According to a recent OCHA report, massive population displacements have led to a further deterioration in the humanitarian situation, particularly in the Menaka and Kidal regions of northern Mali. More than 7 million people, mostly children, are in need of urgent humanitarian aid, the report says. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, also states that 1.3 million people will be food insecure by August if nothing is done. According to the OCHA, these people will have to depend on food assistance with drastic consequences for children under the age of 5. The report also points out that the number of people said to be in crisis situation has more than tripled since last November, rising from less than 16 to more than 60,000 for all the northern regions and the Mopti region in the center of the country. The UN Humanitarian Agency deplores the deterioration in the security situation and the lack of funding during this period, which has hampered the work of humanitarians. To date, Mali has more than 350,000 internally displaced people and over 90,000 refugees in neighboring countries. This has, however, not prevented the country from receiving a massive influx of Burkinabe citizens fleeing the violence. More than 65,000 of them have arrived since the beginning of the year, according to Humanitarian Coordination.
David Vincent reporting there. You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Here is a reminder of our top stories. Organized Labour in Nigeria vows to reject meager addition to 60,000 naira as minimum wage. Senegalese government welcomes result of the National Dialogue on Justice Reforms and assures full implementation. United Nations Humanitarian Coordination raises alarm over the increasing displacements of populations in Mali. Still ahead in the news, health authorities in Liberia move to clamp down on fake and illegal institutions. We do have the press review, our guest interview segment, and sports news. Please stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
Don't forget, you can listen to us live on wadr.org and follow our live streaming on Facebook and YouTube. Now let's take you to the Gambia, where the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defense and Security held a consultative meeting with the Office of the National Security. This meeting was convened to help the lawmakers familiarize themselves with the National Security Council bill, which is set to be tabled before the National Assembly later this month. WDL Sankli Jankin Manju reports.
The Standing Committee on Defense and Security of the National Assembly convened a consultative meeting with the Office of the National Security. The meeting aimed to scrutinize and improve the National Security Council bill before it is presented to Parliament for consideration. This bill forms the bedrock of the Gambia's security sector reform process, which has been in motion for a while now. Abubakar Suleiman Jeng, the Gambia's National Security Advisor, explains.
Specific provisions in the bill outline the national security architecture of the country and the overriding consideration of the security of the individual, as well as the new vision of human-centered security. Admittedly, today's interface represents an important step towards the reform, restructuring, and institutional development of the security sector in the Gambia.
The Parliamentary Committee on Defense and Security has a critical oversight function specific to the security institutions and the National Security Office to ensure effective service delivery in the Gambia. The Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Sidinjai, emphasizes this role.
As a committee and Parliament, we recognize that national security is a collective responsibility, and it is imperative that we commit ourselves in supporting the effective functioning of the national security mechanism for sustainable democracy and development.
The National Security Council Bill of the Gambia identifies a national aspiration for the Gambia to be a nation that will have a professional and apolitical security system able to protect the country and its people in line with fundamental human rights and rule of law. For Newslink and West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sankula Jenko reporting from Banjul.
Ghana's Electoral Commission has rescinded its initial decision to political party agents from observing the ongoing voter transfer exercise. The Commission recently directed its regional directors not to permit agents or political parties to observe the exercise in response to several clashes triggered by disagreements between the ruling New Patriotic Party (NPP) and the National Democratic Congress (NDC). The initial measure was intended to maintain law and order during the process. However, the opposition NDC strongly opposed the move. At a press briefing Tuesday evening, Deputy Chairperson of the Electoral Commission, Samuel Tete, in charge of operations, announced that the EC reversed its decision to ensure transparency but cautioned agents against inciting trouble.
The political parties are well aware that one can object to a voter's eligibility on the grounds of residency during the voter's exhibition exercise and not during the transfer of votes exercise. The Commission finds the blatant interference with this process by the agents of the MPP and the NDC unacceptable. However, following internal discussions and in consideration of the concerns of some stakeholders, the Commission has decided to revert to its decision at IPAC. The Commission has directed its officers at the districts to allow agents of political parties to observe the transfer of votes exercise with effect from 5th June 2024. We strongly urge the agents of political parties to abide by the rules and refrain from any form of interference which leads to violence, as witnessed over the last few days.
Samuel Tete is Deputy Chairperson of Operations at Ghana's Electoral Commission. Now authorities in Liberia is making a move to clamp down on fake and illegal nursing schools operating across the country. A task force to this end has been constituted by the Minister of Health to ensure their closure. Recent statistics by the Liberian Board for Nursing and Midwifery show an increase in the number of bogus health training institutions in the country. WDL's Darlington Popeye Monrovia reports.
The chairperson of the Liberia Medical and Dental Council, Dr. Benito Collins Andrews, said her institution funded several local health facilities operating below professional standards, resulting in deaths. She stated that some of the medical facilities hired the unqualified medical practitioners to perform advanced medical procedures.
Both clinic was found liable for the death of the patient, and appropriate sanctions were instituted. The family was duly informed, and we're still trying to work on implementing some of the findings that we have. Also, the Gateway Medical Clinic in Combotown had several cases against it, and after the investigation, they were also found liable, and they are being appropriately fined.
Alarmed about this revelation, the Liberia Board of Nursing and Midwifery assures the protection of the sanity of the nursing profession in the country, detailing the measures to be implemented if the Chief Registrar of the board, Cecilia Bangla Flomo.
Our policy requires that when you are illegal and you start to operate, when you write us, we tell you that we cannot deal with an illegal establishment. Our involvement with you to start a nursing and or midwifery program while you have opened and fooled the public and illegally established is wrong. When it comes to the law, there is no one higher than the law. So all of these, the sector, all of these are possible.
Citizens, particularly in rural Liberia, are hopeful that these regulations will be instituted soon enough. Record in 2022, the Liberian Medicines and Health Products Regulatory Authority confiscated from various clinics and pharmacies several consignments of expired, fake, and banned drugs they have been administering and dispensing to patients. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Darlington Pogba in Monrovia.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
Well, let's join Sankle Janko in the smiling coast of the Gambia for the newspaper review.
Hello there and welcome to this edition of the press review coming to you from Banjul, the Gambia. Let's start today's press review with the Fourier newspaper whose lead story reads, Jar Oil clarifies claim of cement shortage in the Gambia. WADR actually did a report on this particular story. Coalition of CSOs launched social media campaign against FGM. That's another story. Only survivor testified in alleged police shooting trial that involved Usman Bojang, who allegedly shot 3 police officers, 2 of whom died. President Barrow, EU ambassador, discussed government expansions, schools, electricity projects. And this other one reads, South Africa president faces up to poor poll result. Let's move on to the Standard newspaper, and the lead story on the Standard newspaper reads, BAC vows to defend vendors against illegal demolition. BAC is Brikama Area Council. This council operates in the biggest region, and that is West Coast region. And their chairman, Yankuba Dabo, has vowed that they will not allow any illegal demolition against the vendors. Government confident about RFH contract despite hiccups. Diba speaks after detention. Diba is an opposition member of United Democratic Party. He was recently arrested following what were considered insults towards President Adama Barrow. Woman hacked by husband narrates ordeal. French photographer exhibits portraits telling stories of Jame victim. This one reads, Environment Minister tours flood-prone areas ahead of rains. Government announces availability of enough cement. Now let's move on to the final newspaper for the day, and that is the Point newspaper. And the lead story on the Point newspaper reads, Gambia among lowest internet ranking globally. That is according to a survey. Trade Ministry updates Senegal authorities intercept cocaine worth 2.7 billion CFA. That is another story on the Point newspaper. And the final story on the newspaper review for today reads, Spain registers 21,926 irregular migrants in 5 months. I'm afraid these are the major stories making headlines on Gambian dailies. And it's back to you in the studio.
Many thanks, Uncle Janko in Banjul there with a newspaper review.
Politics, analyses on major news, social matters, and all. This is The Guest
Now, what would be the ideal living wage for workers in Nigeria is the biggest story in the country as negotiations between organized labor and the federal government are ongoing and will be resolved within a time frame of 5 days. While Labour say they will not accept any lean addition to the 60,000 naira, about $40 offered by the Tripartite Committee on the New Minimum Wage, some financial experts and economists like Barnabas Esiet, publisher of newsshelf.com, opines that based on the current realities, anything above the threshold of 100,000 naira, about $70, will affect the economy.
It's a dicey situation, I must say. Let me give you my take on this. I think it is outrageous, not as though that money is big, but looking at the economy of Nigeria and productivity and every other thing, I think it is not workable. I mean, where do you expect the private sector, even the public sector, to have that money from? It will come back to the workers. Our experience from the era of Udoji salary increments tells us much about what is likely to happen, because ever since that time, whenever there is a salary upgrade, you find out that inflation and other factors overwhelm such increases, making the workers even worse off. So what I would have suggested to workers is to ask for a steady economy. So I think what we need to do is, stabilizing of prices, making sure that the exchange rate is not too high, taking care of insecurity, and many other factors that help productivity.
Well, Mr. Barnabas, as it is now, the government and the labor unions are in negotiation. What do you think should be the ideal minimum wage?
There is no ideal minimum wage as long as the economy is not stable. You may give workers 1 million naira today, and tomorrow fuel prices goes up to 200,000 per liter. I mean, how would you be able to cope with that and transport and all that? So what I will say for now, if we compare other top oil-producing countries in Africa, before now, with a 30 minimum wage, we were like next to Sudan that had some as little as 7,000 in naira equivalent. So, but Ghana within 50 and the rest of them. So I think those countries still fall within between 60, 70, 80, aside from the top Angolan and the rest of them. So, but I think something around the neighborhood of 100,000 naira would be okay for the economy for now, though even the private sector may not be able to afford that.
Barnabas Esiet is an economist and publisher at newsshelf.com. Sport news. Sport in tennis. The world number 3 Coco Gauff came back from a set down to defeat Ons Jabeur and reach her second French Open semi-final on Tuesday. Gauff, the reigning US Open champion and a former Roland Garros runner-up, rallied to win 4-6, 6-2, 6-3 on court Philippine Chartier and will face either tournament favorite Iga Swiatek or Maketa Vodrozova for a place in the final. It will be the American star Gauff's third successive Grand Slam semi-final, and after also making the last 4 at last year's Australia Open. And we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Christian Mukudi and David Vincent for the technical support. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is our flagship gender program, 50-50 with Nadi Ditete. I am Imo Edet. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening.